Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We will start, and hopefully with all the challenges that these transmissions pose, we will be able to go through the 2 hours of our session without any big difficulties. Maybe one announcement that I will make from the outset, which is that for the moment Spanish translation is not available, but the colleagues are working so that it would be made available in the course of the discussions. Apologies for our colleagues who are relying on that. I understand that it's just about...
Sorry to disturb. There is one booth which is working, and we are trying to solve the second one.
Okay.
You have Spanish interpretation.
So there is actual Spanish interpretation for the now. There is a second booth which is about to be put online as well, so hopefully we will have no difficulties with the translation during our conversations. So I will start with the adoption of the agenda. As you received it, we have only one item of substance for today, which is the exchange of views with Thierry Breton, Commissioner for Internal Market, whom of course we welcome. I will come to that in a second. I will also go very quickly through the chair's announcements, which actually contain, I believe, quite an important point of substance which I would like to address, which is the fact that this week we celebrate the European Parliament's Gender Equality Week. It starts today. I think it's a very important point. We in AIDA are doing well. We are doing well because we have 3 female vice chairs in our bureau, which I think is I don't know whether we are the best in all committees and special committees, but certainly we are failing well. And we also have 5 coordinators. And that, I think, again, for our committee, it speaks volumes. But it's not the same, as we well know, for the rest of the Parliament. It's not the same for the rest of the European institutions. It's not the same for our societies. And I'm sure that all of us speaking in different events on artificial intelligence, we often speak about biases. And we often speak about biases that are bringing prejudice, including on gender issues, and algorithms which are almost by design or by the way they use data sets, continuing with the prejudices and the discrimination that we have in our current societies. And again, as a special committee working on artificial intelligence, the discrimination against women, gender discrimination, has to remain on the top of our agendas. So let us take our 2 first meetings this week as an opportunity to reflect and discuss and exchange amongst ourselves, among other issues, on how we can improve on gender discrimination, including through the use of this important technology, which is artificial intelligence. With that, I will move on to point 3, which is approval of the minutes of our constitutive meeting of 23rd of September. The minutes are available online. I propose that if there are no other objections, that we consider them adopted. And I pause for 20 seconds. I see no reactions and hear no reactions, so we can consider them approved. And that takes me to the first and only point of substance for today, which is, as I said, the exchange of views with Commissioner Thierry Breton. Now, a few points of housekeeping. And I would like that we try to keep as disciplined as we can through these housekeeping rules. We have a very strict slot of 2 hours for which Commissioner Breton can be available for the exchange with us. And I propose that we use this slot of 2 hours very wisely. Now, to use it wisely, and knowing that we have a list of 18 speakers, to whom I would like to give the opportunity to put their questions forward and engage with the Commissioner in an actual exchange, which is why, based on the consultations and decision that we take with the coordinators, we agreed to approach our debate differently and not take blocks of questions, but rather take slots of 5 minutes per each member wishing to take the floor. How will we organize these 5 minutes? 2 minutes, and please be as mindful as you can with these 2 minutes. So 2 minutes for the question, 2 minutes for the Commissioner to respond to the question, and then there is a remaining 1 minute. Now, given the usual extensions of the 2 minutes question which we can expect, and the fact that we have 18 speakers, we run the risk of running behind schedule, which is why I would kindly ask you to resort to this extra 1 minute for a follow-up question and a quick follow-up response from the Commissioner, only if you really feel you need it. So if you feel that there really is a follow-up question necessary based on the response of the Commissioner, then please use this, and I will grant you this follow-up question. But if you don't deem it's necessary, then I would be very grateful if you would not use it, so that we have enough buffer time to stick to our slot. So again, with the list as we have compiled it, I will go one by one through the members that have announced themselves as wanting to take the floor in the order of the groups, as you know it. 2 minutes for question, 2 minutes for the Commissioner to reply, and again, the additional 1 minute for a quick follow-up and response if needed. I would also hope to remain at the end with an additional 10 or even 15 minutes window, so that the Commissioner could give us a closing set of remarks and conclusions if he feels necessary. So with that, I propose that we start with the exchange, and it gives me a lot of pleasure, and I also would like to express my gratitude to Commissioner Breton for making himself available for this very first formal regular meeting of AIDA. Commissioner, please, the floor is yours for an opening remark of 10 minutes. Commissioner, please. Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dragos Diroache. Thank you very much to all those present today. Thank you very much for being here and being interested in taking part in a discussion on this very interesting subject matter. I'm very happy to be here to have an exchange of views with the AIDA Committee on Artificial Intelligence. This is a very constructive process which we already launched. It's something very important for our citizens in Europe, for the European Parliament, for our businesses. I know that you have all spent quite a lot of time working on this issue. I've discussed the matter with quite a few of you already, and I'm very happy to continue our conversation this afternoon. First of all, what is the current state of play? As I've already said, and I tend to repeat, Europe is an industrial continent. We are the most industrial continent, and therefore we must tap the potential available to properly position the European continent in this area. We should be a leader in this field. Artificial intelligence has to do with the quality and quantity of data. And a major source of data is industrial in nature. There's no AI without data, of course. So we must be prepared for this huge wave of data that will reach us, much more important than personal data. My goal here is twofold. First of all, I want to focus on the uses of artificial intelligence. As I often say, I'm not one of those that feels that it is desirable to regulate one specific technology, especially if it's in its infancy. Nonetheless, we do need to focus on the uses of AI and the implications of algorithms. And we need to regulate in order to properly manage the risk. we need to organize a proper data market. This is indispensable in order to manage and control and develop a true AI industry on this continent, especially as regards industrial data, but not exclusively. Very briefly on AI and regulation, we're preparing an act for the beginning of next year, and we hope that it would include the uses of AI. It's not an easy thing to do because we have to establish confidence in AI. We're here to help entrepreneurs, startups, and we're not here to stifle innovation, of course. But we also have to keep up with technological developments. We can preempt some of them, but not all of them. So we cannot refresh and review the Digital Services Act every 2 years. So we have to keep up with technological developments, algorithms, for instance, that will change, and there will be more of them in the future, etc. So don't focus on this emotionally speaking. The emotional aspect is, of course, important. Let us look at this more generally and with a view to the future. Because the intelligence software, the algorithms, will continue to develop and will continue to interact and develop as circumstances change and as our needs and uses change and adapt to reigning reality. We're going to present a 2-pillar white book on digital services and AI. We want to create a center of excellence to innovate and an ecosystem based on confidence so that we can develop the use of AI. As regards technological developments, as I said, we're going to have a white book, or a white paper. We hope to have a great deal of cooperation between the digital sphere and other areas. There are many resources that already exist and will continue to be developed. More than 1 billion euros investment in the European Union. As I've said often, I have fought so that we include 20% of recovery national plans be devoted to the digital sphere. And part of this will be devoted, of course, to AI. As regards the regulatory approach that we're working on, we would like it to be proportional in nature, of course. We must make sure that we're not too excessively rigid. We have to be able to welcome innovation in this field, and we have to be able to manage the risk and manage that risk on the basis of concrete uses of this new technology. We have to protect fundamental rights, of course, and security, the security aspect. As regards the White Book, it's a draft, of course, still. It's been quite warmly welcomed. We have more than 1,200 contributions after a public consultation process, and 20-odd% came from outside Europe. And that bears witness to how others are interested in what we're doing here in Europe. We're one of the first to launch such a broad and wide-ranging process of consultation. So after talking to everybody involved, to all stakeholders, we will present a first draft proposal at the beginning of next year based on 5 or 6 principles, which I will very briefly mention now. First of all, a wide-ranging definition of AI, a functional one, and one which will withstand future developments and technological advances. Secondly, something based on risk and a legal framework which would be applicable to all types of AI, but there would be limitations for specific uses of particular concern. We have to focus too on a definition of what we would consider low risk and those that are higher risk. Some uses, of course, carry very low risk. Others carry a higher risk and are only authorized for specific purposes. Risk to health, for instance, there's some applications which, for instance, innately considered risky. So for that, we need to do something fundamental, especially as regards the quality of the data set. We have to make sure that the data sets are as robust and precise as possible. I've said this from the outset. That is key. It is a quality of data that makes sure that the applications of AI and algorithms are of the utmost highest quality. Then we have to verify things ex ante before AI systems are sold. We need conformity measures, we need market surveillance measures, and we need to manage the risk ex post as well, given that these are applications which are constantly evolving. And by their very nature, we're going to pay special attention to biometrics identification, for instance, for use in airports, stadiums, roads, and highways. So we have to make sure that there are conformity standards here and that these are met and that there will be additional conditions attached to all this. And then the chatbots and things like that, for that, we need clear information for the user. So our citizens should know what they're doing, really, and what risks they run when they're involved with chatbots. So the new rules will apply to all AI systems sold in Europe for European users, whether they come from Europe or from third countries. We're not talking about excluding anyone. We want to just clearly outline the rules reigning in Europe. We want to make this transparent. We want to help this industry develop for European industry and for those from outside too, who would like to put forward AI proposals to our citizens. AI is a very important type of technology, and it's too important for us to depend in Europe on non-European algorithms and undertakings alone. But we want to have the choice, really, and offer the greatest choice possible to European citizens. So we also want to have European alternatives, of course. So as regards data, we're working on a regulatory and technological basis. As regards a technological basis, first of all, as the German Chancellor was saying, she wanted to make sure that we had a real data economy in Europe. We have missed out on the first wave of personal data sets. We don't want to miss out on the second wave, the wave of industrial data, which is even more important. And this is why we have launched this initiative, and it's most appropriate and well-adapted strategy for the world in which we live. It will help us make sure that our data sets our industrial data sets are robust and that we will have the necessary regulation and legislation to ensure that there are sufficient guarantees. So we have a very clear goal: European data, especially industrial data, must be stored, processed safely in Europe, and we need rules, European rules and standards, and we don't want those imposed from a third country. We want our own standards and rules to apply. This is key for the development of AI in Europe, and then we have a four-pillar strategy. First of all, we're going to develop secure and safe European clouds for industrial data. We don't want to be subject to an extraterritorial jurisdiction in this sphere. I like the joint declaration at the last council from the member states under the aegis of Peter Almayer to launch before the end of the year with certain European industrialists a coalition. Then we need our data to be robust. 8 billion euros is what we're going to invest. We want to be in the top 5 worldwide. We need to have more powerful digital mechanisms, and we must look to the future because there will be more developed algorithms and computers in the future. So we must be aware of this, and we need to be able to evolve as these things evolve. So we don't want supercalculators, no processors that are not up to speed. We have the capacity. We need to keep up. We have the know-how too. And I am working with the European Processor Alliance at the moment on all this. And then the regulatory dimension is important too. Together with you, I want to set up a single data market, which is sovereign and which conforms to our values and our standards here in Europe. So we will have a Digital Service Act and one that governs data. We will be able to see what data is sensitive, that of hospitals, for instance. Strict criteria for the reuse of this data will be imposed, and this will be subject to European standards and rules. This is particularly relevant for AI. It would involve, for instance, photographs, scanners, etc. Involved in medical diagnostics, for instance. We want to create a framework which will allow new platforms to emerge, different platforms to the current ones, we need to be able to allow data to be shared, but safely. A digital twin sort of idea. And then thirdly, we want to establish clear rules for data entries for where data then is collected for the public good. And then fourthly, apart from this act, the Data Governance Act, as you know, we're trying to make more public data accessible and available, statistics, geospatial data, for instance, and given its potential for the startups and small and medium-sized enterprises. And we're trying to prepare an act for data sets. This will be important for artificial intelligence. It will allow access to a greater volume of data, key data, with the associated algorithms, of course. And then the last item I wanted to mention very briefly and quickly, indeed, was that next year we're going to table a data act to increase equity in data processing in the context of B2 and B2G. And we also hope to improve and analyze intellectual property issues related to data as well. And that's all I had to say. I'm at your disposal should you have any questions. Thank you very much for that very clear introduction.
I'm told that we still have a technical problem with one of the 3 translation booths for each of the languages. Which means that if we want to continue and not be at some point interrupted altogether from translation, we have to do a 2-minute reboot break. Please do not discontinue your connections. So all members, I would kindly ask that you remain connected. Same for the commissioner. So you don't have to do anything. But we need this 2 minutes break so that the colleagues reboot the system for the translation, and then in 2 minutes I will start with the list of speakers. So again, do not touch anything, just take a break of 2 minutes. Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, thank you very much for waiting, and again apologies for these technical difficulties, but we all know that it's not easy to work in these conditions, and thanks a lot to the colleagues and the interpreters for their patience and for sorting this out. So with that, we start the cycle of questions. We will start with first Eva Meidel on behalf of EPP, please, for 2 minutes.
Please press the speak button.
Commissioner, good afternoon. Very happy to be able to have this first exchange of views with you. My question goes in line with what you said in the very beginning. You said data is very precious on its quality and availability. And I would say so is the quality of AI based on that data. So my question goes, could you please shed more light? How are you going to make sure that data sharing is encouraged? Will it only be through voluntary schemes? Will there be mandatory schemes? What kind of incentives are considered in either situations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. Commissioner, 2 minutes for the reply.
Oui, bon, merci.
Thank you, Eva, for that question. Yes, of course, we need access to data and we need a good quantity of data. There are 2 major types that we're working on. Specifically, this is where we're trying to organize the governance and sharing of the data that you're talking to. So, public data. Here, this is in some ways a common good. So we have a whole section on how we will encourage the sharing of public data. We tend to say that in some ways they've been paid for by taxpayers when they were generated. They belong to European taxpayers, and so it's important that in the right form. Some may be shared in a gross form, others will be different, but they need to be able to be shared. Particularly as regards innovation and startups, we expect to see a lot of changes there. Then you also have data that arises from economic activity, from businesses, and here we are working on a sector-by-sector approach. Some sectors, for example, the automotive industry, well, that data there will be really precious as regards manufacturing, research and development for specific types of motor or other types of engines and so on. And so that's all business data that we don't need to share. But then you have other areas, and I think the automotive industry is an interesting example. There are other areas where we do have an interest in making this data public and shared. It might be driver monitoring data and so on. And here, industry, it's in their interest to share it because that's how we make progress together across all applications. As regards healthcare and health data, that data could be shared, of course, respecting certain very strict conditions, as you will understand. But then there is data that must be and can be shared in an anonymous way, because that will allow science and technology and medicine to be developed, but of course that will be subject to very strict conditions. Next, to answer your question in just 2 minutes, well, we need a single market for data with the greater movement of data. We need organized sharing with public data on the one hand and private data on the other. Sharing, well, we need to be very clear on the fact that conditions need to be set for the sharing of data. We need to be sure that data remains under European jurisdiction. That's something that I think is very important. And secondly, we need to make sure that that data is given through consent. That's extremely important. We don't want to have any kind of pressure or any kind of data theft and so on. It needs to be done in an organized, voluntary way. So very briefly, that's my answer, but I would be very happy to go into more detail with you in the future. We could look at each sector as we go.
Thank you, Commissioner. Eva, any follow-up question? I take it that this is not the case. Okay, then, Eva, please.
Please press the speak button. Madam Maidel, you need to press the speak button.
Commissioner, thank you for your answer. In my conversation with stakeholders, among the issues that need more clarification is the data donation and its protections against illegal or illegitimate use. So how do you envisage control of donated data, be it from a business perspective or also from a citizen's perspective? Thank you.
Commissioner, if you can, a very quick reaction.
Rapide, Monsieur le Président.
Well, I'll be very brief, Chairman. This is a case that we're focusing on closely. That's what we also call data altruism. And as regards data altruism, we will, of course, come up with a very specific framework so that the topics mentioned by Ms. Madel are dealt with specifically. So this is a subsection of this act, and it will allow us to promote data altruism, but also to avoid those concerns and fears that she mentioned. So there will be specific provisions on that.
We lost you. We lost your video signal. Maybe while the next speaker puts the question.
Moi?
Okay. Now I move
video speaker? You lost my image?
we don't see you now.
You don't see me? I see you.
Okay.
What do you want me to do?
No, now it's fine.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the next speaker on behalf of S&D, Brando Benifei.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. I have a question. One of the most urgent issues to tackle as regards data, which you've already said a number of words on, data which is really essential for the development and adoption of artificial intelligence systems. This issue, this very urgent issue, as I was saying, is the significant degree of market concentration that leaves most data in the hands of several businesses, and that has an impact on startups and SMEs, as you mentioned, but also on public activities. So how do you intend to make sure that current legislation like copyright and database rules don't undermine these efforts to have better access for SMEs, startups and public entities to have access to that data? I'd also like to know, given that the Commission Work Programme mentioned a review of the database directive, and so here I would like to know how that review might be done in order to help smaller businesses.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your answer.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Benifei, for that dual question. It's a very important one. I think I said it implicitly in my opening words. We are an open continent, but what we want is that within that setting we promote innovation in these nascent sectors. You were talking about public data, I think, and it's an exceptional situation. Well, we need privileged access for public entities and for public data in order to add value for SMEs and startups. We are planning that indeed within our proposal. So I think you'll support that. It's very important. I've seen it for myself, how much innovation and how many young people come to see us with these ideas. It's really extraordinary. So we need to do what we can to make that data more available to them. And this will be in the Data Act. The second question is about the the Data Governance Act. The Commissioner corrects himself. As regards your other question, coming in 2021, we aim to make this data generally available for SMEs. So, two positive answers to your important questions on access for SMEs and startups.
Monsieur le Commissaire, colleague, any follow-up questions? Please.
Sì.
Yes, I'd like to ask another question. One of the most urgent issues when we talk about data is interoperability. We've seen that as regards health, as regards contact tracing apps. Today, interoperability between Italian, German and Irish apps has been launched, and that was thanks to the interoperability gateway by the European Union, and other countries are going to join us there. So these standards are part of the e-health 2012-2020 program and the EDAS initiative. So my question is whether this kind of standard for interoperability is can be replicated in other sectors in the EU, for example, in public administration, research, or in the private sector, compared to the current situation. What difficulties would we have to overcome as regards implementation of that?
Commissioner, a quick reply.
Non, mais là, je vais être...
Well, I'll be very clear on that. You are completely right to say we need interoperability. We are creating a single market for data. I am the Internal Market Commissioner, and I'm also in charge of digital policy. So I want a single market that is completely fluid and open, and if necessary, and that goes without saying that the same goes for data. What you're saying about apps, that the tracing apps or for the COVID pandemic, we are pushing for those apps to be interoperable because it's really important. It's just a small example. So my answer is yes, it's completely essential for the internal market, and we will not accept lock-in situations. This will be, and in some way we would like to prohibit lock-in, which would establish barriers within the internal market.
On behalf of Renew, Mrs. Venyahan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Commissioner Breton, for joining our first AIDA meeting. As you know, the AIDA committee will be very busy with streamlining the understanding and positions within the European Parliament on artificial intelligence and the data strategy. And for my group, Renew Europe, there are some key points that we want to ensure when it comes to AI and data regulation and putting the EU at the forefront of innovation. That is, of course, a framework that provides for legal certainty in order to foster scientific and economical innovation. And of course, we have to ensure not to put additional bureaucratic burdens on European startups and SMEs, but to empower them in their competition with big tech giants. And of course, keeping high standard when it comes to consumer protection in Europe. All these goals we will only achieve if we manage to have European standards for the whole single market. Fragmented national legislation on AI and data can certainly not be an option. For me, of course, it's very important to ensure fundamental rights and data protection. Neither AI regulation nor the data strategy should in any way undermine the rights of our citizens. Concerning the EU data strategy, therefore, I would like to ask you, Commissioner Breton, how is the Commission going to ensure that highest standards of data protection for our citizens are not only going to be applied in theory, but also in practice? And more concrete, how is the enforcement of data protection against violators from inside and outside the single market going to work? And in your opinion, with which measures can we ensure an enhanced level of cybersecurity to protect our citizens and industries' data? What are the current key problems for our cybersecurity in Europe? Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Svenja. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The Commissioner asks the interpreters to speak a bit louder so that we can all understand each other, because the quality of the sound is not very good. Now, to answer your question, Svenja, I completely agree and share your ambition for the European Union to become a leader on these issues. That's why we're working on it, and we want to avoid having excessive bureaucratic constraints on businesses. You were quite right to say we need to avoid any kind of fragmented regulation, which would put an artificial brake on the development of this technological sector. It's a emerging sector. Let me say that again. So, how do we avoid situations of abuse? How can we have protection for businesses from unfair competition? Well, when it comes to products, we need to look at usages as well. When the products contain AI, we need to know about that. We need to know what they contain, what the data sets will be used, and we need to know that these products comply with our regulations so that we do not have products on the market that contain AI which do not comply with our requirements and our values, because underlying all of this are our values. We want applications to comply with them. So that's an ex ante control that we will implement once we can be very clear on the contents of our directives. We talk about conformity assessment as well here. And as I said, if it is not compliant, then that product will not be allowed on the internal market. We will apply that to new applications, to new usages, which are found in specific individual products. That's the case for the different abuse cases that you mentioned. You've got abuse of privacy and so on. What's very important And the chairman mentioned some of our values earlier, such as gender equality. Well, that's all really essential and fundamental for us. It's also true for cybersecurity. There will be a number of conditions to meet, and if it does not meet those conditions, it will not be allowed on the market. So thank you for that question, because it really raises some important issues that we're working on. Let me say this once again. We're not talking here about putting up artificial borders. We just want to ensure that our rules and values are known to everyone. Those who wish to come onto our internal market, then they respect them. And if not, they will not be allowed on our market. And so for us as Europeans, that will apply as well. This is what we're working on, and we will do that actively.
Svenja, any follow-up questions? Okay, if not, then we will move on to the fourth speaker on behalf of ID, Christina Anderson.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. In the past, the EU tried time and time again with euphoric ambitions to create this. However, there's a great failure. The euro is the first failure. It does not actually fit to the requirements of the different member states. On the issue of immigration, the EU has two different positions. There are true problems, and the member states have to take their own decisions. For example, we're seeing the case in point in Hungary. There's also the problem with transfer services, which amount to hundreds of thousands each year. The EU as a whole is taking a red turn, a socialist turn, that is. We see this. A further problem is with Brexit, the loss of trust there. Now, looking at AI, this is an issue which the EU has taken into its hands much too late. The United States and China are far ahead of us. And our situation concerning AI is miserable, to say the least. Which consequences does the Commission draw from the failures that were made in the past, and how could we make sure that with artificial intelligence the EU does not once again make this issue a failure? Thank you.
Expected to answer on migration or on Brexit, but if you could be so kind as to reply on the artificial intelligence one.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you also. Well, the Commission also thanks the interpreters because it's now a bit better. So I will focus on what was relevant in your question for the IDEA Special Committee. You say that, well, I disagree really with your analysis. I disagree because, well, as Commissioner, but also as a specialist in this sector, because this is something I have worked on for many years, and so I just don't agree with your picture of the situation. I respect what you say, but it's not a picture I share. We have a delay on artificial intelligence for industrial applications, and that's really what's going to become the most important. The most important data is going to be industrial data. We are the first industrial continent, and we are the #1 industrial continent in the world. And it's the industrial continent that's the most innovative in these processes, with digitalization of its factories, with the integration of automized systems, including ones based on AI. And here, one of the objectives of the work that we are doing today is to ensure that Europe keeps this position in the forefront when it comes to industrial data, and we need to make sure that the progress we have already made allows us to go even further. Now, as regards personal data, we've talked about that. But I'm convinced that the pack of proposals that we are making will allow us to regulate this situation well, including by respecting the processes and values for certain applications. These are European values, and so we need to come up with, well, data is not innocent. Data coming from a certain part of the world will not give the same results as ones coming from another part of the planet. And so this is why I've said from the very beginning that in a certain number of specific cases, which are sensitive and important, we need to have data used in Europe, and the algorithms that use them and the machines that are based on them need to do that in Europe with European data, and they need to be compliant with our rules and under legal jurisdiction, and that needs to be exclusively European.
Commissioner, Mrs. Anderson, any follow-up? A quick one, please. If not, thank
Nein,
you.
danke.
No, thank you.
We will move on to the Greens now. Kim van Sparendak, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Click the speak button.
Push the speak button, please.
All right, thank you. Artificial intelligence and the availability of data is crucial in the EU's energy transition towards renewables. We need AI and data to accurately match offer and demand for renewable energy sources. But at the same time, we see that artificial intelligence, but also our increasing data flows and data centers guzzle up energy. An estimate of the University of Massachusetts shows that the training the AI in a digital home assistant costs 300 tons of CO2. In my home country, the Netherlands, we recently opened our largest wind energy farm. The energy produced by this wind farm, however, is being used for the increasing energy demand of data centers rather than actually contributing to lower CO2 emissions. If we choose for a sustainable future that is fit for the digital age, we need clear rules to ensure our two EU priorities, digitalization and sustainability, are not mutually exclusive. We are in a climate crisis right now. We have no time to rely on voluntary actions by private companies, nor do we have the time to get this wrong. Mr. Commissioner, is the Commission planning to take the environmental impact of AI into account in assessing AI applications and infrastructure? And will you consider binding energy standards for these technologies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner?
Merci.
Thank you very much. I think, and I say this very sincerely, it is something which has preoccupied me for many years, even before I became commissioner. Because objectively speaking, and you're right in what you say, very often we say that digital technologies are something that have changed our living and working habits, and they're very valuable to our community. They provide added value to the way we live, etc., etc. But when you talk about data, you have to stock the data, and then you have to mention servers, and that involves electricity, and that means energy consumption, and you square the loop then. And several years ago already, I've been saying you generate more CO2 data processing than you do with aviation worldwide. So I agree with you 100%. All efforts we deploy, including using new processors, you know that processors consume a great deal of energy, especially when they're cooling. It's the cooling that's one of the greatest energy consumers. So very often one puts them where energy is abundant, or where cooling is less onerous then. So together and in parallel with the applications we're talking about, we need to find applications which will contribute to saving the planet. But the more we use this data, the more energy we consume. So we have to invest in this aspect too. We need green processors, those that consume less energy. And for cooling, well, we have technologies that I'm very familiar with, European technologies. We are going to cool these large processors with water. We bathe them in water because this means you don't have to cool the entire room in which they sit. So of the recovery plans that we're working on, or the relaunch plans that we're working on, well, we have 20% for the digital relaunch plan. As I mentioned earlier, we are also going to develop green technologies. There has to be a link between one thing and the other, of course, so that, for instance, when we develop new digital applications, we can also incorporate that dimension, the green dimension. I think that is our European specificity, I think, and we're the only continent to do this in this way, and I am convinced it's indispensable for the future of our citizens. It's also an important investment when it comes to competitiveness. We will be the first to regulate in this way, but it requires significant investment. Before establishing standards, rules, etc., we have to build up this technology that we need, green and otherwise. All companies in their annual reports put what they're doing about CSA, corporate social responsibility, to what they're doing when it comes to developing digital technologies, etc., and they must also mention how much CO2 they generate. Yes, I generate a great deal of CO2 is what they should put in their report if they do. So I really endorse what you say. It is fundamental, but I remain optimistic. And I have faith that we will be able to, on the one hand, increase the number of data processed, and on the other hand, reduce the energy we need to do so.
Follow-up question, Kim, or?
Yes, thank you very much. I think to build up, this more greener technology sector, and seeing the importance of AI and data availability for the energy transition, does the Commission actually see added value in obligatory data sharing in the energy and environmental sector to speed up our energy and climate transition?
Thank you. A very quick answer, Commissioner.
Well, what we would like is to have amounts. First of all, we have proposed that 37% of this plan be devoted to accelerating this transition, Kim. That's what the Commission has proposed. So it's a certain percentage of many billion. So when I speak to member states, I say, look, well, they ask me, what about digital? How much? And I say, well, invest green technologies too, that will be digital technologies but will consume less energy. So this is how I'm trying to establish the link between the two. And we vision here. We're not being naive, Kim. We're not naive. We know when we talk about AI, what we're talking about. What you're implying there, what you're saying implicitly, is algorithms and artificial intelligence. Well, it means that you have to run algorithms for months and months, and that consumes energy. So you have to. I'm very happy that you asked me this question, actually, because it's something we're trying to do, and we're really focusing on. We need standards for green technologies too, and we're working on this for green AI too. So we need to focus on this, not just us, but member states too. So it's a very important pillar, and thank you for that question. It's not mentioned often enough, and I find it fundamental.
ECR, Hert Bourgeois. Mr. Bourgeois, we don't hear you. We see you, but we don't hear you. Can you try again?
We are refreshing the connection.
Can you hear me now, please? Okay, there's a technical problem. Thank you, Chair. Monsieur le Commissaire, je vais poser ma question.
I am going to ask my question in Dutch. I listened very attentively to your very promising and positive vision of artificial intelligence. I wanted to ask, when looking at regulation, that we don't hamper the development of AI, that regulation is proportional, that we focus on what is high risk, and that we decide properly where to put regulation and where not, and where it's necessary or not. I want to focus on data sets. In the EU, I think that we have a huge delay when it comes to access to all this. The 5 biggest digital enterprises worldwide are not European. We have a brain drain of students, of scientists who go to the US because there they use open data and big data from the major players. I think that the problem is access to creation of data. I think that we need to solve this. How do you intend to do that? Are you going to provide a stimulus package to our undertakings? And if so, how? Data sharing, etc.? Or what are you going to do about this, and how are you going to make sure that this gets better? There's better circulation of data and of all these technologies from universities to undertakings. We need a better circulation to move all this from the academic side of things to the more practical side of things. How do you intend to approach this? Thank you.
Je reconnais à travers votre question.
That's the question from an entrepreneur, isn't it? Or a businessman, because this is what it comes down to, really. We need to find a middle way, then, between regulation and imposition or obligation. We're talking about an industry which involves the intelligent, repetitive use, continuous use of a data set through intelligent software. That's what we're really talking about. And this means that you have to use things that have been analyzed and pre-programmed. And you have to be able to forecast to a certain extent the results you will get. So it's something which in many areas is in its infancy. I mean, you can call it artificial intelligence or what you like. That's what you're talking about anyway. We have that matter of high risk. We haven't spoken of it enough, perhaps, but you've mentioned it explicitly, areas of high risk, to identify them properly. And then you mentioned how can we stimulate companies by allowing them to have access to this data. There's a lot of public data too, which include innovation too. Many of these we have not seen on the market yet. Given the industrial position of Europe, and we are generating the most number of this sort of data set, we have to make sure that all European innovators will be able to have access to that, including universities and including startups which resulting from universities and including university labs, because I too want to enhance cooperation between labs, scientists, researchers, and provide them with access to this data. So when we talk about availability or accessibility for startups, etc., I think of universities too, because they are an important factor in innovation, and they are an important factor to retain young people and train them to be scientists, engineers, etc. Many say, well, I'm going to stay in Europe anyway because it's here that I can get the most interesting data and the greater number of interesting data, which will help promote innovation. This, however, well, I'm going to go a bit into detail here. You have technology bricks used by those big platforms in California, TensorFlow, for instance. These are companies which have then developed algorithms. Well, we can use this as a basis in Europe and develop it further, of course. Of course, we have a bit of delay when it comes to personal data. There's a bit of a backlog there. It's okay, fine. Let's not really whip ourselves about the back too much about that. But let us focus on industrial data in order to build our future, the future of Europe, but digitally and technologically speaking. Universities and companies or the business world must have a good relationship. And students are important here, especially postgraduate students. Those especially that work part-time in business at the same time as they're doing their PhD. I think that that is important to have things circulate and move from one sector to the other.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to GUE, Fernando Barena, please.
Please press the speak button.
Speak button, please. Yes, we can hear. We can see you.
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. Many thanks, Mr. Breton, for your intervention. In the impact assessment on artificial intelligence conducted this summer, the Commission proposed binding criterion to be respected on high-risk artificial intelligence applications. And meanwhile, several national or local authorities have recommended a ban on facial recognition in public space or emitted strong concerns. In the face of these recent elements, what's the evolving view of the European Commission on how to regulate some extremely high-risk artificial intelligence applications, such as facial recognition, predictive policing, and effect recognition? Considering the uncertain results of such applications and their impact on fundamental rights, what are the policy options that you are considering, and what is your current assessment of such options? Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner, please.
No, Monsieur.
Mr. Barina, is this a very sensitive and important subject matter? When we talk about AI, often we talk about facial recognition, biometric identification, etc., especially when we talk about the uses of AI. And when we talk about high-risk applications, well, we're talking about things that go beyond that. But you're right. Public opinion is very sensitive to those aspects. We have in stadia, in cities, under the control of local authorities and municipalities or the police, we've put cameras now in order to properly or for security, to allay security concerns, really, and for the flow of traffic, really. But we must respect personal data. So we cannot use that data, that information, to do something which does not conform to the rule of law. So I understand your question. Everything that we're going to do when it comes to biometric identification and AI algorithms will be done respecting the rules when it comes to protecting personal data or private data. And you can only use that data under very specific conditions for specific purposes. You've seen that in the white paper. We have underscored what the specific risks to fundamental rights linked to the use of biometric technologies, facial recognition, for instance. Now, that's the most well-known here. And we have launched a discussion to see whether the rules are sufficient to protect the rights of citizens or whether we need additional rules. One option, for instance, might be to not ban private or public use, but to introduce the obligation to seek authorization. It's very important to do that without warning, just like that, without asking for authorization from anyone. This data is not freely available. This data is used, I don't know, to control the flow of people, for instance, as I've said already, in stadia, or in airports, for instance. But we need to inform people of what use might be made of the data collected from their person, and ban it for certain uses, of course. We need to approach this in as practical a fashion as possible. So we have to respect the law, of course. So we need to focus also on high-risk applications. This is a high-risk application. But artificial intelligence goes way beyond that, of course. That's just one example of where we need to focus particularly, and where we need to manage and govern the use of this data which is potentially high risk, and control it.
Any quick follow-ups, Mr. Barima?
It's okay so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We've burned through more than half of our session, so I will have to make an executive decision to change the approach. So from now on, for the second and the third cycle, we will not have a follow-up question. So I would kindly ask you to pack your questions into the 2 minutes that you have. And also, Commissioner, I would kindly ask if you could also be more compact in replying, so that we are able to release by the time that we promise that we will release you. So we start with the second cycle. Mr. Axel Voss for EPP, please.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak in German. Commissioner, thank you very much for being at our disposal and for your explanations. We are truly carrying out a digital jump for the moment. in these times of the pandemic, but we're also seeing how dependent we are on non-European services. And this is something which we do not want to see in the case of AI, because we're speaking of a strategically very big part of our life. We also need to be able to answer the issue, the problem with unfair competition. What about being able to have a common aim for all EU member states to have a common aim for AI? And what about knowledge transfer from R&D and from the world of scientific results, and how to feed these into the practical developments with AI? How to enable that what our researchers are developing doesn't just simply get sold to the US or to China, but that it actually can develop its full potential in Europe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voss. Commissioner?
Monsieur le Président, je vais vraiment...
Chair, I will try and be as brief as possible, but it's such a passionate subject, and I feel so passionate about it that it's hard. But I will try and respect your wishes, even though the question that has just been put to me would merit hours, really, in my response. There's a lot to be said. Angela Merkel made some comments on this. She said quite rightly that from now on we have to set up digital sovereignty for the European continent. That's what it's about. It's about seeing what we need in order to ensure that the architecture that we are constructing will allow this industrial data to benefit and promote innovation, modernization, and provide new services for our businesses, not just technological ones, in Europe. I would like to mention some elements. You spoke of an initiative launched by my friend Peter and the Mayor, Galix, and now that has been expanded to cover all of Europe. It was decided to establish a European Cloud Alliance of industrial cloud then. These are very many specificities. It's much more complex than a cloud for personal data. These clouds for industrial data, you have to respond every millisecond and less than every millisecond, really. So it's something much more robust than for private or personal data sets. And that is what this alliance is going to focus on. They're going to use public investment, investment from the member states and the Commission too. It's something which I find very important, I find very interesting. That's the first thing. Secondly, no digital sovereignty means no autonomy. We need to be autonomous here. We need to manage and have oversight over our own processors, super processors. And for that, we need digital know-how. And we need the capacity. We have the scientists, we have the engineers, we have the academics, we have companies, we have the business world, etc. We need a processor industry which is more independent, more autonomous, more European in nature. And here, an alliance, if it could be established, would be helpful. I think, well, with the rest, we're going to just talk to the Chancellor. I know that she is trying to push this forward too, and then connectivity too is important. This will allow everyone to have access, irrespective of where you are in Europe, access to fast internet connection, etc., etc. Of course, security is very important. So we need the resources. We need a budget. SPCI is important too. And we need a regulatory framework, of course, the appropriate regulatory framework. The Data Act, that's what we're working on, the DSA, the DMA, which will allow us to put all this in its proper context and framework in Europe. We're not a closed continent either. We want those that come to our shores, we want to welcome them, but we want them to respect our rules. And for that, our rules have to be clear. And we're going to present all this next year.
Vice President Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for sharing the ideas and time with us. We will be many working here on the documents already provided by the Commission, also on the data strategy, and we want to have more data flows in Europe. But I can continue from the previous question a little, so you can elaborate also more, that we also have European industries that have the global service sector, and they need to data flows also internationally. And we do not want Europe to be the continent of the forced data storage here, but we want to create ecosystem. So if you want, you have now time to elaborate more how to see this part. But then also for the more data to be shared from government to business, the business answered, yes, good idea, but from the business to government, they are hesitant. But then when I talk to stakeholders, they are different size, they always lack that the smaller one is in the worst situation. So do you want to elaborate on the ways that there is rights for the data access when it is co-generated, so that the tractor owner can also know about their own driving and possibilities to improve the usage and so on. And I must take my second question now here, as in last weekend in Finland there happened a hacking in the system of the psychological center, and it might be 40,000 patients and on the people who use the therapies that they now are threatened and blackmailed to pay bitcoins, or they will be published the data. I'm very happy that the response was that we do accept people searching for help for the mental needs they have, but then at the same time we don't know how seriously their personal logging emails, data social codes are then threat. So do you, Mr. Breton, think that the GDPR is enough, or is there something that we should not only threat of the 4% fine of the global turnout, but should there be more rules to prevent?
Bien, merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kumpula-Natri. Let me begin by starting at the end. So no, the GDPR is absolutely not sufficient for protecting our data against attacks and cyber attacks. That's quite clear. Cyber attacks, what you've talked about, a very scandalous, tragic case, data which is personal and intimate, and it's being used for blackmail. I have seen so many situations of this kind that unfortunately I know just how creative hooligans and thugs can be in this regard. So we need a European cyber shield. We're working on it. We're going to present it to you. It's going to be a complementary act to what we're talking about that will protect the Union much more. It will have a security operational center in Europe that would be a center within Europe where we can closely analyze the different threats before an attack takes place so that we can prevent it. The area that you're talking about is something that we are working on very hard, and you can see that we're putting together all sorts of different bricks to try and come up with a structure to regulate our informational space within where everything is happening. So all of the questions that you're asking, well, they won't be answered just by what we're doing in AI, but everything that we're doing to protect our fellow citizens and businesses in this information space. When I talk about protecting, I'm talking about protecting against cyber attacks, against certain online harm, when major actors have a monopoly on the market, when they act as gatekeepers, DMA, and of all of this, we'll answer your questions more in more detail. We have the Data Act, to refer to your penultimate part of your question. That Data Act will organize the sharing of data. We have another act to be presented in 2021. It's quite sensitive. We need to put a framework in place, and not everything is going to be possible, of course, when it comes to mobility data and the data that might be shared by the transporter. Well, we could use them and share them, but not if it reveals the journey taken by an individual. So we need to have guarantees of anonymity, and I won't go into much more detail now because we're pressed for time, but we are working in that spirit that you mentioned. Thank you.
For Renew, Susana Solis Perez.
Presidente, y gracias, comisario.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
El elemento es...
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. Digital innovation and the main databases in the public and private sector, these are very important. These are also very important for startups and for SMEs, because these can more easily test their new products, and this is of course of great benefit for all European consumers. But therefore it is essential to be able to guarantee that those who develop all of this technology can access data, large quantities of data. And then there is, of course, there are problems such as the fragmentation. I would like to share some data. Only 12% of SMEs can use biodata analytics for the moment, and they could use much more. And therefore, I would like to ask you, how can we guarantee that our startups and that our SMEs, that entrepreneurs can have access to this data? And what about the risks? Do you think there's any risk if data is stored and analyzed within the EU? Could there be a measure introduced to guarantee that startups can use all of this within the EU? And what about innovation? What is the European Commission doing for the moment to promote sandboxes for startups in AI? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Merci, Susanna, pour ces...
Thank you very much for those questions. I'm not surprised to hear questions again about SMEs. This is a fundamental topic. I've already talked about it. You're quite right about the figures. 12% is clearly not enough. We need, and everything that we're doing within DG Grow is focusing on the deployment of digital for SMEs. But this is a topic that we're particularly focusing on. I already mentioned the recovery plans made by member states, where we want a significant part of them to be focused on SMEs. One specific point I'd like to raise is what you're saying about regulatory sandboxes in artificial intelligence. During the public consultation that I've already discussed, many businesses in member states expressed their support for regulatory sandboxes in AI. These would be a good way to create a secure space for innovation, whilst ensuring regulatory supervision for AI and by reducing the associated risks. This is something then we do want to pursue. We're working to promote them so we can implement legislation in the future that would once again allow us to analyze and propose specific sandboxes. And again, we also want to encourage cooperation between different within sectors, so bringing together consumer protection, data security, and so on. And we also wish to encourage cross-border initiatives. Once again, let me say there can be no AI in Europe without the free flow of data within the entire internal market. So these are a number of elements that I'm quite sure will allow us to develop these initiatives for SMEs. I understand your question. SMEs are, of course, like all economic actors, they are going to have to start to digitalize what they do, their services, and so on.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am again looking at the watch. I am again pressed to make another turn of the rules. We are starting the last cycle going through all the groups. Since I know that you only have 20 minutes left, Commissioner, available to be with us, I would propose that we will actually take all the colleagues in the final round with their questions, and that you would reply at the end, trying to also sum up in your replies with your final thoughts and remarks. I'm sorry that we have to do it this way, but I don't see how else we can go through the list. And I would think it's important that all the colleagues who wanted to speak today get their chance to ask their questions. So with that, I will then go through the remaining 7 colleagues, ask them to ask the questions. Commissioner, if you could note down the questions and then give your blocked answer with your final remarks at the end.
Oui, je le fais, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, I will do that, Chairman. I will do that, but I will be available to come back to your committee again if you want to have another meeting, because this really is a very exciting topic. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Avec Madame Anna.
So we begin with Anna Asimakopoulou from the EPP.
Speak button, please.
We will refresh the connection. Please press the speak button. Please press the speak button only once.
Okay, we will try again. We will now move on to S&D, Sven Mixer, and then we'll come back to Mrs. Asimakopoulou if she reconnects. Mr. Mixer, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being with the committee. You have spoken at some length already about the high-risk areas and high-risk data and applications. And I have a question about a particular policy area, that's defense and security. The Jury Commission's report on the ethical aspects of the artificial intelligence classifies defense and security as a whole as a high-risk sector, and autonomous military systems as high-risk use or high-risk purpose, which could entail risks of breach of fundamental rights and safety rules. So therefore my question is that as the white paper of the Commission signaled that we should have a stricter approach to high-risk areas, there is a labeling scheme proposed which would distinguish between the high-risk and low-risk areas and would offer just only a voluntary labeling scheme option for low-risk sectors and areas. But would you consider labeling the whole defense and security area as high-risk? And connected to that, another question. Given the somewhat stricter approach that the European Union has adopted and somewhat stricter view, risk-based approach to the artificial intelligence in general, how do we mitigate the risks for the competitiveness of the industrial sectors, including the defense industries, compared to those countries that adopt a more lax or less strict approach, such as China, but also the United States? Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mrs. Asimakopoulou reconnected? No? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please.
Okay. Très bien. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Maintenant, vous m'écoutez, oui?
Thank you, Chairman. You can hear me now.
Votre présence aujourd'hui.
Dear Commissioner, thank you for being here with us today. I had the honor of talking with you at the launch of the European Alliance, and I know that we share the same belief as regards the importance of the economic autonomy for the EU. The area of data comes up every 18 months. We need to collect and treat. The way we treat data will be fundamental for the development of AI in Europe. Commissioner, you have stressed several times one of the three pillars of digital sovereignty in Europe is to build an ambitious data approach for data which must be stocked in a European cloud. You've also talked about how sovereignty is not about isolating ourselves, but ensuring that anyone who wishes to invest in Europe respects our rules and values. As a member of the EPP, I am of course in favour of competitiveness and the opening of markets. As a representative of Greece, I am in favour of any investment in Greece which would contribute to our national economy. Recently, our Prime Minister, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, announced an agreement with Microsoft for cloud storage. This represents an investment of 1 billion euros and a training program for 100,000 citizens. So my question to the Commissioner is as follows. How does digital sovereignty in Europe to support this, how is it incompatible with competitive markets? What will happen to a data center in Greece? We need to respect our values and rules, but how can you allow investments in national contexts, and how are they compatible with these cloud centers?
Also on behalf of VP, Mr. Jürgen Warborn. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Commissaire, thank you for coming here today. Over the last weeks, I've spoken to a number of stakeholders, and one problem they all have in common is the absence of legal predictability. It is impossible to get a national agency to make a preliminary assessment, giving green light to the use of data in a certain way. Instead, the SMEs or the businesses, they have to wait for an afterward inspection, risking heavy fines if they don't use the legal ways correctly. And this, of course, creates a massive uncertainty. And this gets even worse if you try to migrate data between the member states, because then you have different national agencies. And unfortunately, faced with the risk of substantial fines if you do wrong as an SME, you don't dare to follow up on your business idea. And this, of course, has to change. And I would like to hear from you, Mr. Commissioner, how you would solve this problem. Do you support the idea of creating a guidebook on EU level on how on pre-approved procedures for startups and SMEs, how they can handling the data? And what is your roadmap to make sure that SMEs and startups feel confident enough to innovate on data? Thank you very much.
Tack så mycket. On behalf of ID, Alessandra Basso, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. I will try to be very brief. When we analyze the analysis of data with algorithms based on AI is going to revolutionize in an unpredictable way many service sectors. I'm thinking, for example, of insurance. The sharing and distribution of data coming from smartphones or smart devices, like in cars, domestic appliances, and so on, will allow for the almost perfect profiling of the individual insurance risks of citizens. So we will have car insurance that may be dependent on the different journeys that we make every day, or healthcare insurance that will be related to how much physical exercise we do or what we eat, our food habits. These developments might seem appealing for big insurance companies. They will see a large degree of the uncertainty that their work involves disappear. But at the same time, it risks creating significant differences in the provision of these essential services, such as life insurance or health insurance. So what remains of individual freedom when every choice of our life may be valued and priced, and may indeed have an impact on whether or not we can receive a form of insurance, which would allow us to have effective health care. It might be necessary to impose legislative restrictions on how far these systems can go, and there might be lower and upper limits in the difference of prices that can be put on the basis of data provided. So I'd like to ask the Commissioner if, as part of the potential legislation being put forward, whether they're thinking about how to avoid excessive personalization caused by AI in sectors such as insurance and others.
For the Greens, Marcel Colaya, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming, as well as for your introductory speech. I have 3 questions on behalf of my political group. First, the high-risk, low-risk approach to artificial intelligence is of a great concern for our political group. We don't find the 2 categories sufficient to address the whole range of risks. Hence, we'd like to understand how the Commission wants to ensure sufficient flexibility in the European approach to artificial intelligence in order to protect citizens from potential abuses in the use of artificial intelligence. Second, in the public consultation on artificial intelligence that you spoke about, citizens expressed their concerns regarding deployment of facial recognition and other remote biometric identification systems in public spaces, and called for a legislative action in that matter. How will this finding be reflected in the further Commission's work? And third, based on the Commission's work program for 2021, the only foreseen initiative specifically linked to artificial intelligence is the Data Act. Hence, to what extent do you intend to use the upcoming Data Act to introduce rules on training data sets for development of AI algorithms and to facilitate access for startups, SMEs, and researchers to training data, which may often be collected and held by dominant market entities? Thank you.
Thank you. For ECR, Kosma Zlotowski.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioner. I have 2 questions, which only require very brief answers. First of all, the EU is in last place of the technological race, behind China, behind the United States. These are 2 poles that are completely out of reach for us now, both as regards investment resources and, to be frank, freedom when it comes to data processing and privacy. So, is there some kind of niche within this whole topic that the Commission is particularly interested in, where we do have a technological advantage? Many European companies are global leaders in the production of transport or drones. So how does the Commission intend to maintain that advantage in those sectors through proper investment in the new financial framework? That's my first question. Secondly, we are living through a pandemic. In many countries, Proteger Safe app has been introduced, but that only works when huge numbers of individuals use it. And yet when I leave Poland, I receive a message saying that the app might not work in another country. So is there some plan today for the data in all of those apps to be collected in one place, so that there might be an app that could work across the whole EU and not just within individual countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you. For Renew, Andrus Ansip. Andrus, do you hear us?
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay. My question is about edge computing. It is noted in Commission's data communications that 80% of the processing of data takes place in the cloud and 20% in smart connected objects. It was also mentioned by yourself that the share of edge computing will increase rapidly and it will be 80% by 2025. Analytics in the cloud is becoming a complement to analytics on the edge. However, it seems to me that this communication is more focused on the decreasing share of traditional clouds and less on the rapidly increasing share of edge computing, which is mainly mentioned when talking about investments. And thus, to my questions, do you think we have to pay more attention on the rules on how we can move our questions to the edge where data is generated, and what exactly the Commission is planning to do to foster better processing and analyzing of data on the edge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last question from GUE, Emmanuel Morel, please. Monsieur Morel.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. This is a strategic debate, and I really welcome the optimism and enthusiasm of Mr. Breton. But I do think there is a long way to go, that we must go together in order to achieve digital sovereignty. What I see above all is a huge degree of subordination and dependence, which we haven't talked about enough today. We have Europe's attitude, what I mean is Europe's attitude towards the GAFAs and their immense power. They have the technology, they have infrastructure, they are in a dominant market position. And right now, in the US, the Chamber of Representatives is discussing a potential dismantling of these structures. So what I'm wondering is when we will do that in Europe and how we would do that. Will we use a territorial basis, a functional basis to do that? I think those are essential points. Then to come back to ethics, well, we adopted an important text on the ethical framework for AI, but that framework was meant to apply within member states above all. In the EU, we tend to coordinate member state authorities, but we can see that that won't work without uniform application across the EU. What would stop one or other member states from carrying out what we might call digital dumping, that is, having different rules for AI that would undermine our fundamental values? Now, as regards the fight against excessive bureaucracy, well, there is that risk, and I think it's a problem. I would like to know what you think about a European authority on data and what kind of regulatory powers they should have. I think these are important topics, but I know that ethics in this debate often are dealt with after economic and industrial concerns.
Merci, Monsieur Morel. Commissioner, we have finalized the list of questions. Still many topics in these final rounds, which I would kindly ask you to wrap up and also to connect them with your final remarks, understanding, of course, that we will use further occasions to invite you to our committee and go a bit deeper and more focused in some of the points that were discussed today. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will try and be quick. First of all, I want to be very clear. Ms. Azimakopoulou, I want to be very clear. We are open to all investments so long as they respect our rules. If you have a business going to Greece, then we're very pleased about that, but they must just respect the rules. And for the data that they will process, they need to guarantee to European businesses that they respect European rules. And not other legislations, but ours. I know that's feasible. I know it's possible. I know they will be able to do that, and so we just need to tell them. So then they'll be very welcome. And let's be clear here, we are open, but we have rules. And we are, when it comes to data protection, data security, data guarantees, we want businesses, European governments, and so on. We want that data to remain in Europe. And that is a possibility. Now, as regards security and defense, what's very important is this debate around robot killers and others. What I want to say here is that what we're doing is not focusing on defense. But let me give you an example. The application of AI to defense is very significant. We were talking about cybersecurity a moment ago with these high-performing algorithms to detect weak signals. So when we detect ransomware or something within a software, that takes 200 days to pick up on, and so it takes a very long time to fix that damage. So we need ways of identifying those weak signals and detecting ransomware and so on within a couple of hours or in a few days. So you'll see the difference there, and I think this is true for anything that can protect our airspace and so on. But of course, we don't talk about defense much in these proposals here. As regards SMEs, well, I am of course in favor of some kind of guidebook for the to the legislation. We want SMEs to understand the situation. We have the SME hubs, the digital SME hubs, which will be available. They are going to help people on the ground, and this is something we're working on together with DG Grow and DG Connect. As regards insurance, Ms. Basso, you were talking about insurance. Well, that is a high-risk application, the one you mentioned, and so you're quite right. When it comes to healthcare data, personal data, that's already controlled by the GDPR, so we've already got a degree of protection, but specifically if they were to be used for other purposes, then, of course, this would be a high-risk application and would be restricted as such. When we talk about high-risk, well, since we're talking about high-risk applications, Marcel Collaja raised a specific point on so-called high-risk applications. You said it was, well, that was an important part of your question. There are certain practices we don't want to see in Europe, manipulative, addictive, misleading practices, which we think is all against our European values. Well, these are harmful practices, they're banned when it comes to all producers of AI, but when it comes to the use of AI, high-risk AI, let's not ban the use, but let's just impose certain requirements for usages of and products with AI so that we can attenuate those risks. Any kind of AI system that has a component linked to security or the performance of the product, that will be high risk and it will be subject to conformity assessment, and so on. And for other systems of AI, well, we will come up with a limited list of what usages are covered. It does need to, of course, be changed over time. It has to be a dynamic list. We'll use delegated acts to do that. And that will allow us to follow technological development. That was what I wanted to say on that. Then the risk, what high-risk apps usages might be biometric identification of people, AI systems that independently manage water, electricity, energy supplies, urgent emergency service interventions, credit and finance requests, social services, anything to do with healthcare as a whole, application of the law, and so on. So this is a very major topic. For the work in 2021, well, I can just make a minor comment. In 2021, we will have a legislative act on artificial intelligence, and as was in the 2020 work program, it's not explicitly there, but it is coming. Technological advantages now. To answer Mr. Złotowski's question. Yes, of course, we have technological advantages and we will have the means to finance them. 150 billion euros, 20% of that for digital. Well, here we've ensured that those investments will help boost competitiveness for all the competitive digital stakeholders. As regards the COVID apps that you were talking about, well, in the Commission we have come up with a gateway which does allow for the harmonization of the apps between different European countries. 19 countries today have accepted that gateway. So in 19 countries across Europe, and that number is increasing, when you have your home app, if you cross a border, the data is still available. And we know how it works. When the app detects potential contacts and so on, we know what happens there. A few other countries are going to join that, and so I think that was really along the lines of what you were calling for, so I'm very pleased to tell you about that. Mr. Ansip, you are completely right. Edge computing is a revolution in the sense that, once again, the processing of data is done close to where they are created. They are done more and more locally, and this really shifts us from a kind of centralized cloud to a more in situ processing of data and an ever-increasing amount of data. It's a delocalized system. You talked about edge computers quite rightly. These are decentralized mini clouds, and here this is exactly what we want to do with a industrial cloud alliance. It's not one enormous cloud, but it's rather correspondence and relations between decentralized clouds that will be updated every day, every hour, and then very specific mini clouds that will be very close to where data is created and processed, and they will be specific clouds with decentralized edge computing for specific apps. So this is exactly what you're talking about, and it's exactly what we are preparing for, and that's what we want this Industrial Cloud Alliance to do. Finally, Mr. Morel, you were kind enough to speak French, but I'm not used to doing this, but I wonder if you read the French press, because if you do, then you will have seen that I actually talked specifically about what you talked about in Le Monde last week, and I was talking about big platforms, and you'll see if you read that article that we need to regulate and strengthen our our informational space. As regards ethics, yes, they are part of our rules. They comply with our rule of law, and so conformity conditions will be harmonized so that we can limit the risk of forum shopping, that is having different rules in different countries. We want to harmonize with the DSA so we can all do the same thing at the same time. So, Chairman, thank you very, very much for the time you made available for this discussion. You could see that we could go on much longer. I really enjoyed this exchange of views. You're all very well informed about the topic, and let me just say once again that if you do wish to talk about this again, I am available to do that. The regulation will be proportionate. It will be risk-based. We're going to do everything we can to avoid fragmentation. And once again, I'm very happy to exchange views once again with your special committee. And I really do value the work and the time that you are consecrating to this very important topic and the interest that you are showing, because this is something I also share.
Passion earlier when giving your replies. I think you noted already that we share that passion here in the committee. That's what I think for all of us drove us in joining this committee and joining this work on artificial intelligence. So thank you again for your replies, for your patience. We'll of course invite you for a next occasion where we'll go a bit more focused on some of the items that we've discussed today. Knowing that also the interpreters have to leave, we'll have to stop here. We will resume tomorrow with the second discussion that we have with Margrethe Vestager, the Executive Vice President, for 1 hour, and then 1 hour with the OECD's Director